What a desolate place this is.
For Tatooine, they made an illustration showing 3PO and R2 coming across the desert, and you could see their base capsule in the background. I had done artwork that went into films, but not a feature film, and not anything that matched live action. George would let me know what he wanted, basically, and I would tear through the thing rather quickly. I didn't think my paintings would be reproduced. They were just there to make everybody clear as to what George wanted the film to look like. Tatooine was to be a desert planet. I had a photograph of a big rock on the Oregon coast that I put in for a background. Instead of the ocean, I put the desert in.
We must be cautious.
I did the Tusken Raider painting and the Sandcrawler and R2-D2. There was a whole gang of stuff. I was sitting there working on these drawings, and I was thinking to myself, gee, maybe this thing really will get to be a film, you know. I thought, oh, this is too much, too expensive, just reaching too far out. But sure enough.
Tatooine's one of the most important locations in the Star Wars series, and the reason is that's where everything begins for Luke. There's a number of techniques that were done, and a lot of it was shot in Tunisia. Some of it, the land crawler, was actually shot in Death Valley and with a model about 2 or 3 feet long here in California. Some of the distant views of Tatooine are actually a matte painting. The pod was a model shot against a painting that Ralph McQuarrie did.
My first big scene with alien dialogue took place when the Jawas capture R2-D2 and carry him into the Sandcrawler. You couldn't go out and just record Jawas anywhere. I started out with a gentleman who spoke Zulu, got him to tell me stories and to act out little vignettes, different emotion, you know, angry, laughing, curious. And then we just sort of imitated it from there on. A few of my USC cinema friends, we went out to Vasquez Rocks, which is a state park north of LA with a nice echo. We would go out there and yell, "Utidi!" and this sort of stuff. Utidi! I think I just put everything in it that I found was amusing at the time, because we had so many little personalities as you went along. I found that if I drew upon sounds in the real world that you couldn't immediately identify, it gave real credibility to Tatooine. While they were filming in Tunisia, George heard the braying of the donkeys that were used to transport gear to their location and thought that would make a good sound of the Tusken Raiders. It was a living, flesh and blood animal that gave it a whole sense of reality.
Tatooine, of course, is where Mos Eisley is and where the cantina sequence takes place. And that sort of sets the real fun of the movie. And a lot of the barroom stuff was shot in England, but then a lot of it was also done back here in Los Angeles with various masks that were made and shot, I believe, in one day. A lot of my friends actually had made the masks and were playing the characters themselves. And it was done just as a little insert. And yet, that's so important in the film and so memorable that it really added to the spirit of being in a foreign place.
Luke! Tell Uncle if he gets a translator, be sure it speaks Bocce.
Luke's home was actually a hotel in Tunisia, and not some elaborate matte painting or anything like that. It's reality, a real place they picked, and I think that really helped the film seem very, very believable, because it was done on a real location.
Did you see that? What? I always wanted him to have more fun doing it. I mean, I still think Pardon Me, George, Could This Be Dianoga Poo Poo was a wonderful ad lib. And he looked at me like I had just shot his pet dog and put his foot on my chest and pushed me back into the trash compactor. Because that's what it was, a Dianoga. There's all this stuff floating around in the water. I said, Pardon Me, George. But no, but see, that to him was really inappropriate humor at the time, because I'm sure he's in the zone and he's seeing what he wants to do, and we're just like actors trying to stave off boredom because, you know, we've been in the trash compactor all morning. Although I saw a piece of a documentary where it reminded me of how much fun we had. We were all escaping from the Death Star and running up the ramp into the saucer-shaped ship, and it was in between shots. And we were all goofing around. And it had a nice contrast, I thought, too, because we felt like we were strangers in a strange land. We were all so American, working with all these guys that went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts.
Come here, my little friend. Don't be afraid. Oh, don't worry, he'll be all right.
I was just so excited just to meet Alec Guinness, much less, be in the same scene with him. And yet, it just makes me laugh because, here he's one of the greatest actors in the history of the English-speaking world. And, we're in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon.
They're headed for that small moon.
And, there's a Wookiee and squibs going on.
Before you can make the jump to light speed.
But I kept referring to him as Sir Alec. And he tapped me twice and then gave me a pretty good... I said, what? And he said, I want to be known by my name, not my accolade. To which I replied, what do you want me to call you, Big Al? He loved that sort of stuff. He loves American irreverence.
Go that way. You'll be malfunctioning within a day, you nearsighted scrap pile. And don't let me catch you following me, begging for help, because you won't get it.
I think one reason that 3PO is a kind of lonely figure is his best friend is R2-D2, and they are, really chalk and cheese, protocol versus sort of basic engineering, and yet, as with all odd couples, there is this kind of, I don't know, symbiosis, friendship, whatever you want to call it, that is all the cuter because it is odd.
R2-D2, it is you! It is you!
What is odd for me, of course, originally was that I quickly learned that R2 wouldn't speak to me, and I had to get used to that. So there is this thing, I think, that crosses from my brain to 3PO's, that how come R2 never says anything? And it's only when the magic of Ben Burt gets in there that, that the magic happens. And one of the greatest joys was helping Ben Burt create and for me to speak Ewokese. And that was a bundle of laughs. But I'm pretty much script-bound as to what 3PO says.
Trito Dogra, Isoyoto Amuno Noka.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
It's too big to be a space station.
The Death Star is a fantastic collection of exotic technologies. And it was a chance in the movie to do things with motors and with weird electronic tones and with loops of sound played backwards through reverb chambers. Because this was a powerful place with all kinds of technology, you could practically justify any kind of interesting sound, and therefore I had kind of a field day with it.
The thing that was unique about Star Wars was, previously there had been some interior spaceships done in movies and TV shows and stuff like that, but the Star Wars films, and particularly the Death Star, were different than probably anything that had been done before. The Death Star was just massive. It was like, you're inside of a massive battleship, and not just a large room, but many rooms and corridors. And if you look at sort of like the 2001 type of stuff, that is sort of like narrow corridors and bigger areas, but this was beyond that. And that was, I think, a brand new idea.
The Death Star had to sound powerful above all else, and so underneath most of the ambiences in the Death Star, there's a rumbly kind of sound. Usually it's modulated up and down in some way, so it's not just a constant rumble because that becomes boring. But there was always an attempt to have sounds flowing as if the Death Star was always doing something. There was some kind of transition in energy taking place. And you went from environments, from corridors to the elevator to the detention area to the trash compactor. Each place was different, and there was gradations of mechanical and electronic sounds that were used to orchestrate all of that.
And one of the ways we elaborated on the scale, or added to the scale, was like the shot, sort of the Tarzan kind of shot of Luke and Leia swinging across that massive chasm there inside that chamber. That was originally a much sort of smaller set, still good size, but much smaller. It didn't go down very far because, the actors could have been hurt and all that sort of stuff. So that was a painting extension that we composited in, so it looked like it was actually much bigger than it really was.
Obviously, there's hundreds of sounds associated with all the scenes that take place in the Death Star. But what would any Star Wars movie be without two of the most principal ones, which are the blasters and the laser swords? I still call them laser swords, by the way, because that's what they were called in the original script. The sound of the blasters was discovered by accident. I was on a hike with my family. We passed underneath the guy wires of a radio tower. I bumped against it, and the wire made a twanging sound. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's a laser gun." And that wire on that particular radio tower became the basis for all the blasters. The other principal sound for the weapons is, of course, the lightsaber. And the lightsaber, oddly enough, was the first sound I ever made for the Star Wars films. I had an immediate idea about it, even when I saw the artwork on the wall of George's office.
When I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
I remember when I cut together the first temporary version of the lightsaber fight between Vader and Ben Kenobi. At this point, no one had heard a lightsaber. Certainly no sound had been put in against picture. And I worked alone for a few days in the editing room, cutting the sounds and mixing them together. And then we had a screening of the movie for the editing crew just to see where we're at. And I sort of sprung this sequence on them with the sounds cut in. And I got great reviews. It brought it to life in a way that hadn't existed, because now the swords had energy associated with them, and that energy came through the sounds that were, synchronized with them. And it was a very satisfying feeling. That sound never changed much. It never was challenged by anyone. George seemed satisfied with it right from the start, and I just moved on to the next thing.
I know tests were done on the colors of the lightsabers, everything like that. They originally tried to do it with actual front projection material, with a light right by the camera, so it looked super bright. And then they could do it, without any optical effects, and that didn't work out. So George had to go back, and somebody had to go and sort of animate each of those lightsabers for every single frame, and then color each one in different colors so you could tell them apart. And occasionally add flashes over the whole frame that gave it a lot of energy, and some little lens flares when they cross. All that stuff adds so much to it. If you'd left the lens flares out and if you left the flashes, it would have been much flatter. And that's one of the reasons that sequence is so much more interesting than a sword fight in a Robin Hood movie, because they can't do anything in those movies except just hit them back and forth. But in this case, it was really a wonder to behold, and a real feeling that there's energy in these two lightsabers. When they touch, watch out, because something could happen.
No! When I met George, he was interviewing with Brian De Palma because he doesn't like to talk. Brian talked, and I talked, and then I went away. And he just was the guy with the beard that didn't talk. And then I got a call back. I felt I'd made very little impression on or around him. And then I met him again for a taped interview. And he might have said 10 words. He's quiet, I think, at work. Somebody visited the set. I believe it was a reporter. And after 3 days, they said, "Which one is George Lucas?" He's a totally visual guy. He thinks, I think, in visual metaphor, and he remembers things the way they look and how it impacts on him. I had gone to see them score the film in London, and they played me my theme. Everybody should have their theme. He was great fun that way, that play our theme, because he's very childlike. And I was watching the movie, and they had some temp track with Holtz, the planets, playing over this unbelievable spectacle. And I looked over at George, and he was like this little kid. He was thrilled. He knew it was great. It was fun, and that was the most fun, I think, when he was scoring that picture, and you could see it starting to come alive.
When I came on to the original Star Wars show, the models were already in production, the designs pretty much had been done, and I was involved in shooting them and getting these motions in the spaceships and in the backgrounds on film, so they would look as dramatic as what George had in his head. The movie ends with the Battle of Yavin, which is actually flying around the Death Star and trying to get that thing to blow up. And that was, of course, something that nobody had ever seen or imagined until George came along. And I remember walking in and seeing the Death Star ideas for the first time and thinking, what the heck is this? This is, this sort of canyon, all made by people with armament all over it, and it traverses the entire area around this battle planet. Was a pretty amazing idea. We built a large Death Star model, probably about 4 feet across or so, for all the shots of the Death Star. Had a couple of shots that are like photographs of that were real small, so we could have it in the distance. And all the spaceships were built pretty much about 1.5 or 2 feet wide and shot motion control against blue screen, and then composited in over a starfield background with this model of the Death Star in it also. And we also had a big surface of the Death Star that was made, a couple of them, that were modular, and we could put them together into a large square of maybe about 30 feet square to do flyovers and stuff like that. And there were a lot of explosions that we shot on those things, some of them even out in the parking lot. The design was great, that both from a distance and from close up, you knew you were not visiting any moon or anything like that, or even a satellite. It was way beyond that, something that you really had never seen before. And that was a very compelling idea. The space battle was such a dynamic idea that George had in his head that regular storyboards would not have worked. So what he did was he found a lot of footage from actual war scenes that have been shot by aerial photographers and scenes from other movies, but it was all cut together with music, and we pretty much followed that stuff to get the idea that he was after. Everything's moving much faster, of course, than is in the real footage, because these ships supposedly are going 1 to 5 to 10,000 miles an hour, who knows how fast. But it gave us a starting point. The spaceships flew just like regular airplanes would fly, pretty much. They would bank and then go off in that direction, as opposed to just being able to slide, which probably could have really happened. We contained the laws of physics in that sequence. It's not supposed to be real. It's supposed to be entertaining, and it's supposed to be really neat. The Death Star blowing up, it was shot by Richard Edlund, and he shot it looking straight up in the air at a regular explosion with a very, very high-speed camera. And we had no idea what was going to happen when it blew up. But what was surprising about it, and I remember seeing the dailies, is how long it took them to fall down from where the ceiling was, which was probably 40 feet in the air, past the camera in slow motion. So give me 20 or 30 seconds. You see this beautiful explosion, and then stuff would just start coming toward you and coming toward you and coming toward you. But it all came after having, as an accident, essentially. But an accident we took advantage of a shot that looked better than was expected when it was, when we actually did it. George looked at it, I'm sure, and just said, hey, the shot can run a lot longer. Then just boom, Death Star's gone. Let's have this satisfaction where you've got a chance to hold on it for another 10 seconds, and you have an opportunity for the audience to release their emotion, feel the everything settled, and this movie is now almost over, and the music can tell you that and make you feel very happy that you went through the experience, that the good guys won. One of the biggest sequences we had on Empire Strikes Back was, of course, Hoth, where the land battle took place. When we were figuring out how to do that, my background of effects photography that I've been doing for years, the matting process, where you're putting separate pieces of film together, is pretty problematic, and it was in the photochemical days. So I came up with essentially what was the technique that had been sort of used in the original King Kong, which is doing it all with big scenic backgrounds and layering the sets with paintings and gauze to make it look hazy like it would there, and have everything pretty much finished in front of the camera. So I could just look through the camera and see the walkers in there, a miniature walker and a miniature set with like little tiny white powder on it that would look completely fake if I looked alongside of the camera, but by going back through the camera I could tweak all the little things and make it look like it was real. And then we could, on top of that, we could add in little speeders flying around and everything like that. But it meant that we started out with something that did not have any compositing work in it. I think that really helped the sequence, because any compositing we had to do against a light-colored background was very, very problematic in those days.
For snow, we used a combination of baking soda and micro balloons, so it was real soft, fluffy snow. But it was really irritating to everybody because of the baking soda. Everybody's wearing goggles, and we got running eyes and respirators, and of course the stuff would get all over the camera gear, and the cameramen were always upset.
The sets were essentially plywood with trap doors in them that were hidden. So the animator could sort of hide underneath the table, shoot one frame of film, and then to shoot the next frame where the puppet is, there'd be a trap door that he would open up, stand up, be able to reach out and animate the puppet for one frame of film, just move it to the next slight position, then go back under and close the door, and the trap door had all the sort of white powder stuff on it that made it look like it was snow. Then we'd shoot one more frame of film. And it was that way for 24 frames every single second. And sometimes the camera was sort of locked off, sometimes the camera would be flying down, frame at a time, flying over it as though it was a point of view, and but all done essentially the same way.
But we had to do this shot over and over. So it was one of those things when we finally got the shot, everybody cheered because we just had to get away from the baking soda.
It really helped the sequence, I think, the reality of it, compared to a lot of other work that had been done at that time that was relying more on matting and stuff like that. I'd always followed effects in films since I was a little kid, and I pretty much had an idea what sequences would work, what techniques would work in old films I'd seen, and I could never quite figure out why everybody just didn't do it the right way. But for whatever reason, this seemed to be the right way to do this sequence.
To me, editing is what filmmaking is really all about, because it's the one time you get a chance to create something out of material and actually deal directly with an audience. All the other times you're sort of generating material or supplies. It's like making a film is like buying lumber or cutting down trees and making wood out of it, where editing is like actually constructing a house. I mean, you actually can see it, you can see what you're doing and deal with it. Everybody says, well, the script doesn't work, but we'll fix it later. They say, well, we're shooting this, but it isn't really working, but we'll fix it in the editing. Well, the editing is where it's got to be fixed. If it doesn't work there, the movie doesn't work. So that's, to me, the most exciting part. Well, the trick to a sequence like this, which was the same problem we had in the first film, is that rather than doing special effects that sort of sit there for a long time and are very sort of passive, these battle sequences are created almost totally through the editorial process. And as a result, we're dealing with shots that are only 15 frames, 25 frames, 30 frames long. In order to understand how fast the movement should be, what the shot should be, what the direction should be, and how it should work together in a montage fashion. On the first film, we took stock footage from old documentary footage from World War II, air battles and things, and cut that together. And I cut that together before I even started the special effects. This battle in this film is much more complicated and more specific. It's not just an aerial sort of dogfight. It's a very complicated ground battle. And so we've had to shoot little animated storyboards, take the storyboards and animate them very quickly. We call them animatics. They would do 3 or 4 a day. I would look at them, change them, they'd redo them, and then we'd get them down to where they're almost right. Then the people on the floor shooting the special effects would have something to go by. They know exactly how long it should be, what it should look like, what the movement should be, and all that sort of thing. The animatics don't really come into play until the first unit is shot. We have the pilots. We run through, there's like pilots that were shot blue screen, and then animatics, and then footage that was shot in Norway. And what I did is used the animatics as something to fill in, so I could actually cut the whole sequence and finish it. And I cut this really while I was here, while they were still shooting in England. I was here and I cut the snow battle and did all the animatics and all that kind of stuff. And then I knew what the length of everything should be. But it really just gives me a complete set of footage. I need to have all the shots available in order to cut the sequence. And since many of the shots in this sequence won't be done until next, a week or two before the film is going to be released, there would be no way of cutting it and doing sound effects and figuring out what had to happen and how the movement worked. So this is just a sort of an expedient way of being able to cut the film before it's shot.
Mark is an accomplished actor. He has great technique, humor, very generous in spirit, always tries to do his best. That's as much as you can ask from an actor. He's created this character for himself.
Smell something? There's nothing out here. I'll check again.
I find it very fortunate to have someone that gives me no problems and that I can deal with on a very direct level.
Do it again. I don't like the animal. I like Mark.
Echo 3 to Echo 7. Ano, buddy, do you read me?
Loud and clear, kid. What's up?
Harrison Ford is a joy.
This may smell bad, kid. Probably it'll keep you warm.
Harrison, in some ways, is, he's altogether different in temperament from Mark. Harrison delves into himself all the time, and he's never satisfied. And he has to, he creates problems for himself that in the solution gives him the results that he wants. Both are capable of beautiful performances, but both operate from a different center.
Don't look so bad to me. He looks strong enough to pull ears off a gun dart. Thanks to you. That's 2 you owe me, Junior. Well, Your Worship, looks like you managed to keep me around for a little while longer.
Carrie's another individual. Carrie is, I think, a born actress.
Han!
She has a stunning voice.
I had nothing to do with it.
Great intelligence.
Give the evacuation code signal.
And tries to please. She's always, that seems to be the thing that she tries the hardest. She wants to please. I often have to push her a little bit, not to take an easy way out, because she thinks she's pleasing me that way, but to do it the way her intelligence and sensitivity really tells her to do it. And she gets back to her own center that way, and she's, I think, very beautiful and very rich.
When you've gotten past the energy shield, proceed directly to the rendezvous point. Understood? Yeah. Good luck.
And she's great fun. And I like people that are playful, and she's very playful.
Yeah, great.
Just hang on. I'm gonna start the landing cycle.
When Luke crashes on Dagobah, now he really goes to his master teacher, which is Yoda, and learn skills way beyond what he knew before.
Yoda. You seek Yoda. You know him?
Dagobah is this like swampy, yucky place that you just don't even want to get near. You can sort of smell the yuck in the air.
In order to shoot the Yoda puppet moving, the set had to be built about 5 feet above the floor of the stage. And we would put holes or ridges where it would stand on top of it, and he could move it along in a certain direction. So it had to be predetermined. On top of the stage were trees, rocks, caves, everything. Now, they couldn't hear above, and Mark couldn't hear Frank Oz. How do you do a scene? You can't hear each other. I give Mark a lot of credit for this. Rehearsing it many times, and it was timed so that we could fit the words in later.
I don't know. I feel like... Be like what?
Like we're being watched.
Oh, wait, put your weapon. I mean you no harm. I am wondering, why are you here?
Well, I think the speech pattern, the syntax was there on the page that Larry and George wrote. That was one of the wonderful things about it that helped me figure out his character. And so all I did was I asked George to let me take the ball and run with that syntax instead of just having the syntax occasionally. Let me run with it and really go all the way and always have that kind of syntax. And that's kind of what I did. But it was really their creation first. When I was doing Yoda on the set, besides having fun, it was tremendously difficult physical work. I had somebody doing the cables for the ears, and somebody else was doing the cables for the eyes, and somebody doing the left hand. So I had, me and 3 other people trying to bring one character to life, moving around. So I had to do it over and over and over and rehearse, and then say, okay, I'm ready, and let's shoot. The first day of shooting, we had to scrap. Partly because I did a lousy job, I felt, and George was good enough to do that, to let me do it again. Also because I think one eye wasn't working, so I had to always move his head to one side so you couldn't see the eye that wasn't working. Well, it was Kirsch who did a magnificent job. I mean, he really was very, very instrumental in how Yoda was first seen to the public, shown to the public. And he was the one who really pushed for that impishness there in the beginning.
Put that down. No, we... Hey! It's my dinner!
How you get so big eating food of this kind?
We did a couple of shots at ILM. We did a shot of R2 sort of shooting out of the water, and then we did a shot of some sort of creature swimming around in there. Dagobah was just a very important place for the film. And Luke comes out of that a different person. He goes into the cave to confront his fears. And he doesn't want to do it, but he sort of finds out the lack of limits of what he's capable of doing. There is a leap of faith that you can make and you can willingly make as an audience viewer. And if you make that leap of faith, then whatever's presented to you is just is a wonder. You're not in the movie theater anymore, and you totally believe it.
Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
And the Force is what gives the Jedi his power.
Found in all living things, found as flows from us, controls individuals, yet we have free will. We have a destiny if we want to follow it. We live for a reason and must discover what it is. It looks like it was done when I started Episode 1.
Oh, okay.
Because it looks like it's referring to Episode 1. And a lot of this, like this thing about the Force, in all living things that surround us, is really just a capsule of what was said in Episode 5.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody and you
ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you, whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure, experience. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you, or you're going to lose it, then you start to become angry, especially if you're losing it. And that anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. Mostly on the part of the person who's selfish, because you spend all your time being afraid of losing everything you've got, instead of actually living. Where joy, by giving to other people, you can't think about yourself, and therefore there's no pain. But the pleasure factor of greed and of selfishness is a short-lived experience. Therefore, you're constantly trying to replenish it. But of course, the more you replenish it, the harder it is to, so you have to keep upping the ante. You're actually afraid of the pain of not having the joy. So that is ultimately the core of the whole dark side, light side of the Force. And everything flows from that. Obviously, the Sith are always unhappy because they never get enough of anything they want. Mostly their selfishness centers around power and control. And the struggle is always to be able to let go of all that stuff. And of course, that's the problem with Anakin ultimately is you're allowed to love people, but you're not allowed to possess them. And what he did is that he, fell in love and then married her and then became jealous. And then he saw in his visions that she was going to die. He couldn't stand losing her. So in order to not lose her, he made a pact with the devil to be able to become all-powerful.
I am becoming more powerful than any Jedi has ever dreamed of, and I'm doing it for you.
But of course, when he did that, she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So he lost her.
Anakin, you're breaking my heart.
Once you were powerful, being able to bring her back from the dead, well, if I can do that, then I can be Emperor of the Universe. I can get rid of the Emperor. I can do everything. I can make everything the way I want it.
And together, you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
And once you do that, you'll never be satiated. You're always going to be consumed with this driving desire to have more stuff and be afraid that others are going to take it away from you. And of course they are. Because every time you get two Sith together, you have the master, you have the apprentice, and the apprentice is always trying to recruit another apprentice to join with him to kill the master.
Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
And the master knows that he's basically everybody below him wants his job.
Your hate has made you powerful. Now, fulfill your destiny and take your father's place at my side.
The only way to overcome the dark side is through discipline. The dark side is pleasure, biological, and temporary, and easy to achieve. The light side is joy, everlasting, and difficult to achieve. The great challenge must overcome laziness, give up quick pleasures, and overcome fear, which leads to hate. Amen. Now let us pray.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Another big sequence in Empire was the pursuit of the Imperial fleet when the Falcon is flying through the asteroid sequence. And that was a really difficult sequence to shoot. Not only being able to figure out technically how to do it with a lot of blue screen work and all the little asteroids that we made and shooting them all separate, so they were like, it'd be 24 separate elements that we put together in any one of those shots, but just how to get it to read. There was no horizon line anywhere, so you couldn't tell the menace if you couldn't tip it off at the beginning, showing danger. Then you cut to another angle, oh, avoidance, another angle, oh, they made it out of there alive. So I came up with the idea of putting an asteroid belt in the background of all that, like sort of based on the rings of Saturn. So we laid that in as like, millions of little asteroids that then I could play with in the shot design. So you could tell I'm looking this way, and that's the horizon line of asteroids, and over here I'm looking that way. And you wouldn't be aware of it consciously, but your subconscious very much picks it up, and you're comfortable because you know right away where you are and you understand what's going to happen. At the end of the asteroid chase, somewhere around that area, I had this idea that the Falcon could fly down and go on its side through a canyon. What it did was it made you feel very claustrophobic for a while. And my thinking was that when you came out of it, everything would just open up into, a nice widescreen CinemaScope view, which would be kind of neat for the big theater. And we boarded that, and I just don't remember how it originally ended, but that little bit, which meant the Falcon came out and did this big old loop and went into the cave, made that sequence really, I think it just gave us something pretty neat. And plus some more excitement going on there, at the end. It gave us a chance to blow up a couple of TIE ships, as opposed to the Falcon just hiding in a cave, which may have been the way it originally was. The idea of it coming out, we were figuring out how to make the slug, and what it really is just this large hand puppet. And someone was wearing it, and we had a set that was made probably the size of a couple of ping pong tables put together, and somebody sticking their hand with this creature out of it and opening the mouth of it, and then matting in the little motion control Falcon, which was in fact a little tiny one we had, and putting that into the shot so it looks like it's a giant creature, but in fact it was not much bigger than your hand. And that was a nice little coda, little cute ending that George had that's similar to the ending in Naboo with the there's always a bigger fish. You never be careful that what's hiding there, because it could always come and bite you. In keeping with each of the sequences in the Star Wars films being radically different than the other, one of those radical ones certainly was Cloud City. That's where our heroes go to sort of seek refuge and hide from Vader and the enemy fleet that's coming after him. But little do they know that Lando Calrissian is more concerned about his own financial gain than he is about his friends. Of course, we did the distant views of Cloud City and all the spaceships approaching it. The exterior design is a matte painting, and Ralph McQuarrie did. At one time, there was actually going to be a giant, sort of like manta ray flying through the sky as a means of transportation, but we didn't do it. We did something like that in the Phantom Menace film, underwater. There were closer views of the sets that were done in England, but a number of times we cut back to a wide view, especially when Vader is fighting Luke. The chamber there that Luke eventually falls into is a matte painting that Harrison Ellenshaw did. We had a number of set extensions looking up and looking down to extend it and make it look a lot bigger than it actually was. Sometimes you look down because you've got to see that it's like a long ways down there. And that was an important story point, so that when he fell off, you thought, oh my God, Luke's probably dead.
The interiors of Cloud City were something that I stole from all sorts of areas, really, from the interior of Leia's apartment with recesses of various shapes in the walls was from the German School of Architecture, Bauhaus, in the 1920s. It really is a sort of concoction that tied in vaguely with the exterior, although it's something that sort of evolved, really. I remember designing Darth Vader's dining room. This man being big and chunky, the chair had to be seen with him sitting in it. The chair is sort of like huge scale based on Macintosh designs, actually, the Scottish architect.
Attention, this is Lando Calrissian.
Cloud City could have been twice as big. Kirshner complained that there weren't enough corridors, that the set wasn't big enough. When people are running, they certainly use up a lot of sets. He had to really be ingenious and place his camera in such a way that he could duplicate certain angles, and it all worked finally in the end. But it was a big soundstage at Elstree that we couldn't have made it any bigger, really, without knocking stage walls down.
It was fun looking at the Empire Strikes Back script because I don't even think we had an opportunity to read it because the ending was such a secret.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
That whole Cloud City location where so much happens and you think, how can this get worse? How can this be topped?
That's impossible!
It's the perfect way to end a thriller, and you really want to come back and see the third one.
Don't be so sure. If I told you half the things I've heard about this Jabba the Hutt, you'd probably short-circuit.
Well, for episode 6, for the first time since episode 4, you go back to Tatooine. And now you get a much different view of Tatooine than you saw before in Jabba's palace. The setting being underground made it appear different than Tatooine above ground. When you think about all that was going on under the surface of it, it was so imaginative and a huge scale. There's this sort of creature sitting on this rock, and suddenly the tongue of the creature comes out. It was one of the early shots where George really started treating a lot of the environment with creatures that are kind of secondary to the story. That shot could have just been Meanwhile at the castle, but in fact it wasn't. He put in this other stuff to make it really interesting and more compelling and add a sense of more reality to it. And we shot that many, many different times, in many different ways, many different designs, till we got something that was the right balance between an establishing shot of the castle, and by the way, here's something going on over here. And Phil Tippett designed that and designed a lot of the other creatures that were also in Jabba's palace.
Making these things move. I mean, what if you cut a hole out of the wall right here? And he went in this way?
One of the great things about George, he was just like totally inclusive and would meet with us once a week and say, make me a bunch of stuff. And we'll get together and we'll look at it. And we built like these little maquettes out of clay and Sculpey. And we paint these up and bring them in, and George would look at them. He said, okay, these I like. And he'd look at one and go like, so what's this? And he'd go like, that's a calamari man. And he'd go like, this is Admiral Akbar. Pink. and then so he would start weaving this stuff into the script that they were building. I think there was a couple of things that didn't make it into the final cut that were just like, there was some creature that was made out of light. That didn't make it, but pretty much everything else did.
And the skiff sequence, when they're on the surface of Tatooine, and the big creature that's sort of in the sinkhole was a pretty elaborate thing. It was shot in Yuma, Arizona.
It was an intense shoot. The barge was built on this big platform that was maybe 30 or 40 feet above the desert floor. So it was elevated so they could build the Sarlacc pit down and then have the barge up above that. So there was a great deal of room beneath the dance floor. And so all of the horrible things that live out there and don't generally bother you, we had to be like really careful. Every time we like lifted a box, we'd do it with a stick to see if there was a rattlesnake or a scorpion or a tarantula. The dirt that was on the ground kicked up this dust. The costumes were like sponges of human sweat. So once we wrapped, it was just like, preparing for the next day. And by the time we got home, it was just... George prepares and prepares and prepares. So everything is boarded and figured out. And I mean, the great thing with George was going into this stuff, you knew what you were doing and how you were going to do it. So when we saw the movie, that was the movie we shot.
When I first saw Return of the Jedi, I had an entirely different impression of what Tatooine was like. It's just a bizarre, freaky place that is like your worst nightmare. It's something that was a real surprise to me when I saw it. I didn't know that all that stuff was actually going to be in the film, played that way. It made me never want to really visit Tatooine at all, if it actually existed.
If it's going right to left, it's good, because then you won't shoot against that road.
The Endor stuff, the stuff in the forest, the planet base sort of stuff, was shot in Northern California in the redwoods. A lot of it was apparently private redwood groves that were about to be harvested, and that's why they could go up there and actually knock some trees down and stuff, because 3 weeks later the trees would have been gone anyway. It meant, though, that you could do all sorts of things in a location like that. The worst we did was actually take some explosion and blast it up against a redwood tree that we could then put a speeder bike into it, and at the moment when the bike was supposed to hit the tree, we would transition to that explosion that was already on the tree that looked much more dangerous than it actually really was. It was hot, but it didn't hurt the tree at all. So Joe Johnston and I got together and we designed a sequence for it that wasn't quite what George wanted. I mean, what did we know? So he redesigned something that was much more dramatic and filmic. And in order to sort of understand it, I got some G.I. Joe models and a piece of carpet that we'd found somewhere, and some sauna tubes, some cardboard tubes, and made a little miniature set of a forest that was really crude, wasn't trying to look real or anything like that. But what we did essentially was like an animatic, and made the sequence with these little G.I. Joe dolls.
Roll it.
And that was a really fun sequence to shoot. It started out with Leia and Luke getting on the same bike. Both of them are chasing these two guys on separate bikes. And it ended with both speeder bike guys, I believe, being killed, and Leia's flown off, and Luke is left wondering where Leia is. And that way, I could sort of design what shots look like, which we did for 100 shots that we had in like about the 3-minute sequence. And then I could disassemble that footage and see how many we had looking forward, and how many we had looking backwards, and how many shots looking this way, that way, to start to understand how to make it work. How do you actually shoot this? And I didn't want to do it with miniatures because that would have been the easiest. But I wanted to really get out there and have this thing look real. And we had the redwood forest nearby. So the trick, once I had that all figured out, was how do we move the camera through a redwood forest at 100 miles an hour. So I got the idea of using a Steadicam, which had just been invented a few years earlier, which is a camera stabilizing rig. And actually got Garrett Brown, who invented it, who flew out from the East Coast, and we did a test locally here at Samuel Taylor Park, and the thing actually worked. We put a camera on the Steadicam rig, and he walked through at a slow, steady pace, and we shot 1 frame of film every second. So for each step was a 24th of a second, and we got the equivalent of just over 100 miles an hour that way when you played the film back at 24 frames a second. And that meant that I could figure out how to do the whole sequence. So we did the front views that way. Running the film backwards gave us the rear views, same footage, running the other direction. We could mirror image the film, and it looked like a whole different shot. So for one walkthrough, we had essentially 4 angles. And we did a number of walkthroughs, so we had all sorts of combinations. Side shots we did from moving cars, and trucks, which were pretty easy to do, and those were shot in no time. And there were some other shots that were more elaborate, that we had to have more width that we could actually find in a forest. And we found a road, but to cover up the roadway, we just covered it up with dirt and all sorts of stuff so you wouldn't see it, and that's in a few shots. So with those 3 combinations, Steadicam, side view, or going along a road, and a front and rear view on a narrow road that we covered over with dirt and stuff, that gave all the backgrounds we needed. And then it was a matter of cutting them back together again in the order that the animatic had said they need to be. And then it was a matter of going through with the actors and shooting all the right angles against blue screen, and we could put them in, and it would look like when you reassembled it, it all was a dramatic sequence from beginning to end that lasted 3 minutes and 100 shots. So that was pretty neat.
There's a wonderful trick that good directors have, which is maintaining the fiction that the actors are making an important contribution, and George did that. And it's mostly about having a very clear idea of what it is that he wants. I'm not sure George ever gets what he wants, but he gets close enough so that when he gets in the editing room, he can pull together something that may well more closely resemble his ambition. It is amazing what you can do when you have a vision, when you have an ambition, and when you can bend other people's will to your desire. And despite the enormous difficulties of the production of Star Wars, the thing that kept it focused and directed towards the ambitions was George's vision and his passion for the idea. I mean, I always thought, the character Luke Skywalker was George. George growing up. George facing conflict and the need to prove himself. And he did. Powerfully. And so you'd see the character of Luke Skywalker change from one film to the next and develop in much the same way George was developing.
In Return of the Jedi, you see a reappearance of the Death Star, and there's a couple differences. One of them is that the Death Star this time is under construction, and the other is that the Emperor is actually on board the Death Star this time.
Yes, I know.
Philosophically, because this was the second attack on the Death Star that the audience was going to see, it had to be more complex than what you had seen in the first Star Wars film. And not only were there more ships involved, both in the style and design, but there was a greater number of them. There was also the added complexity of part of the Death Star battle happening out in space and part of it happening down on the planet, which because of the shield antenna had to be knocked out before they could make their attack. So they were cutting back and forth between two different locations in addition to a very much more complex sequence. Working on the sequence, it was almost dizzying the amount of spaceships that were in some of those shots. And they came up with several ways to cheat that. One of them was they would photograph the spaceships, and this was way back before Photoshop, so you would actually have to go in and shoot them on film, make prints, and then from those photos we would go in with an X-Acto knife and cut out the photos of the spaceships, place them on a pane of glass, and sometimes there would be 3 layers of glass, and then they would shoot that, so you'd get 70, 80 ships in one single pass rather than having to shoot each one of them individually. We also got closer to the models. There were a number of models that were built specifically for the attack on the Death Star sequence at the end. One of them was the band on the Death Star itself. We built a very large-scale model of that so the camera could skim along that. And we went back and repainted it, and then it became the band section on Darth Vader's Star Destroyer. We built about a 6-foot wide section of the conning tower on the regular Star Destroyer for some very close shots on that. In Star Wars, there was the famous trench battle, which at the time was just absolutely amazing, with all the fighters flying down into the surface trench on the Death Star. And looking back, that was a fairly simple thing to do with your camera because it's not completely enclosed. You can have a boom arm coming in, holding the camera going down the trench. Well, taking it to the next level on Return of the Jedi, they actually went inside the Death Star, and so you had equipment all around you. And that had to be created in such a way that pieces came out. So every shot you see where you're going down a tunnel, there are model makers and stagehands off to the side waiting as the camera would slowly move down. If a piece got out of the frame, they would go in and move it out, and then the camera would move on even further, and then they'd pull the next one out, like a big zipper in a way. It's interesting in life. Sometimes you go in thinking you want one thing, and then you come out on the other side going, wow, that was great, but not for why I thought it was going to be great. And for me, seeing Star Wars, I was in high school when the first Star Wars came out, and I looked at the screen and I said, that's what I want to do. That looks like so much fun. And within a few years, I was actually working in the model shop on Return of the Jedi, and that was a dream come true. But looking back on that experience, the people that I was able to work with and see and observe and learn from was infinitely more valuable than just the surface of working on a movie that I really enjoyed. It became this experience, this life experience, which has led up to today. I'm here 30 years later.